Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. I'm recording from Vancouver, Washington. It is very early on the morning of Wednesday, November 26th, the day before Thanksgiving. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving, if I don't say it later, and I probably will. I decided, without very much of an agenda, to have my friend and my co-podcast host, John Podhoretz, editor-in-chief of Commentary, or some such poohbah-like title, top guy commentary, and one of the founders of the Weekly Standard. May her memory be a blessing, and many, many other things, White House speechwriter guy and all that crap. But the important part is we are 2/3 of GLoP, the pop culture podcast that we do with Rob Long, although Rob has decided that somehow his pursuit of the internal and the transcendent is more important than telling stories about Cheers. And so he's in seminary. But anyway, the show goes on, and it has a very intense niche following. So anyway, I just figured I'd have Pod on and we would chat about some things. How are you, John?
I'm great.
That's good.
I'm great.
Have you already recorded the Commentary podcast, which you do daily?
I recorded the Commentary podcast this morning. I have a full house at home. My two daughters are home from college for Thanksgiving. My younger daughter, it's her first semester at college. My older daughter, it's her second to last semester in college. And so we are together. My wife will be cooking a beautiful meal, and tomorrow we will enjoy that meal. And my sister is in from Israel, so we will be having her at table, and perhaps my dad, who is turning 96 and is not very mobile. If he doesn't show up, we will be bringing him food to enjoy and visiting with him afterwards. So it's a pretty great weekend for me.
I feel like your dad could do a good imitation of the guy in Avalon and say, "You cut the turkey." But
one of my favorite little known actors, Lou Jacoby, one of the greats. If you are like a follower of the character actor, or the sort of the that guy, the people, somebody say, "Oh, that guy." Lou Jacoby is one of the great that guys of all time.
I think about more than is warranted, I'll just say. Do you remember the guy? He was on An Odd Couple, so obviously you remember him, at least in part. But the guy who almost invariably played a maitre d', who would go,
yes,
extra
Fritz
prima good.
Feld.
Yeah,
Fritz Feld was his name.
Of
the guy who popped, who did.
Yeah, it made the And for listeners who can't figure it out, we'll put a thing in the show notes. But it's this popping sound that you make when you smack your mouth. And I often think that I imagine him talking to his kids, and his kids making fun of him for doing that, and him being like, "Hey, put you through college."
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. There are weird other that guys. The Odd Couple has one who was also then later on MASH. One of my favorite weirdest that guys is a guy who played a psychiatrist on
Sidney Green,
The Odd Couple, right?
Yeah.
No, and he
Sidney Greenberg,
he hypnotizes Oscar into becoming a clean freak,
right?
And then later he's Sidney on MASH, and his name was Alan Arbus, and he was the husband or the ex-husband of Diane Arbus, the very famous photographer who famously photographed kind of freaks and weirdos and stuff, and was maybe the hottest American photographer of the 1970s and 1980s. And I always thought it was interesting that she was supported in her endeavors by this guy who was on The Odd Couple and MASH, this kind of avant-gardist American freak show photographer.
Before I lose the plot on the did you cut the toiki thing?
Yeah.
So as you know, I have a famously shiksa mom who was a great cook, and so she very much did sort of standard American Virginia, grown up in Virginia, mom from Boston kind of classic Thanksgiving fare. Is there anything inherently unique about Jewish Thanksgivings that I might have missed growing up?
No, I mean, the only thing obviously would be that some people like have ham. Ham can often be a feature of a Thanksgiving meal, and that would not do because ham is, of course, not kosher. And even if you're not kosher and a Jew, you will tend not to have a ceremonial pork product at your big holiday feast, but pretty much the same. The major thing would be you couldn't also like have a butterball turkey, right? Because you can't base the turkey in a milk product. That also violates kashrut. But otherwise, I don't think. I will say this, which is the feast aspect. Whenever Jews have a big feast, there's going to be something like brisket. There will be some manner. I think we're having pot roast, but pot roast is, of course, just another term for brisket somehow, or it's like slow cooked brisket. There will always be some kind of a brisket feature. And I'm not a fan of brisket, but it's just, it is you just can't escape it.
It depends how you cook it and all that kind of stuff. But I like a lot of briskets. I mean,
it's a very unusual position that I'm staking out here. It's simply a matter of de gustibus non disputanda. But I am saying that as a Jewish person, there is no getting away from brisket. It will follow you to the ends of the earth. You will end up in Antarctica in some hellhole, with the thing chasing you in the tunnels. And then when you have to sit down to eat, there will be a brisket on the table.
I hear you. And you are unusual insofar as you like gefilte fish and dislike brisket, which to me is getting things backwards in life.
Fair enough. As I say, I can't defend it.
Okay, so I warned you I was going to do this as I was trying to think. We will get to the important stuff like heist movies and all the rest. But I think about this thing that you sent me, which I guarantee you do not even remember sending me this email. But I had sent around this thing I had written for the Claremont Review of Books. I don't even remember. It was my review of the Claremont Review of Books, like the collection book of like 10 or 20 years of the CRB kind of thing. And I sent it around because back in 2012, I still occasionally sent pieces I wrote around to people and said, hey, take a look. I sent it to you, and I will edit as needed at the end where you had cast some shade on people that we don't need to drag into this. But you wrote, this is a great piece. The one thing it convinces me of, as I'll say in a blog post at some point, is that one great intellectual disease is the hunger to codify, to determine what is or should be the first thing, capital F, capital T, from which all other things spring. The Jaffaites of CRB have decided it's how one views the founders. Catholics have natural law, etc. The key to the neoconservatives is that there was no one thing other than the conviction, as you allude to, that Western civilization is great and must be defended from those who would define it out of existence. That by definition has no fundament, and I think one of the reasons this email sticks out in my memory is it was one of the first times I'd ever heard someone casually use fundament without an AL at the end, because that by definition has no fundament because there are so many. The Torah, the Greeks, the Romans, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Locke, and to tell you the truth, and entirely between us, it's why I find blah, 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 blah. Some people have lost their minds, and we don't need to get into who lost their minds. Right. So, and then but the point one of the reasons I've been thinking about it of late is we now have Tucker Carlson saying that Zionism is the fundamental threat to Western civilization. And we have a lot of people who I think forget horseshoe theory, right? I think that there is just simply an anti-Western civilization virus that because of the DNA of the right versus the DNA of the left, manifests a little differently. You get kind of different kinds of zombies, but they're still zombies. This fever of anti-Western civilization, anti-constitutionalism, and really fundamentally anti-American attitudes is just friggin' all over the place. And I'm wondering first of all, whether you agree, but then second of all, like I find myself more sympathetic to the old CRB position, which is that's why we got to make the Constitution the fundament,
right?
Because we're never going to settle these, disagreements of taste. Do you like gefilte fish? I'm not going to put you in camp over it. And you can't organize politics around whether you like Chaucer or Shakespeare, but you can about your loyalty to the Constitution. Anyway, what do you think about all that?
Interesting. I don't remember the email, and I'm a little alarmed at how pretentious it was. But I will say that. So for the uninitiated, and not to get incredibly boring. So the Claremont Review of Books was sprang from this class of thinkers whose intellectual godfather was Harry Jaffa. Harry Jaffa was a member of the philosophical academic subspecies of political philosophy professors who were known as the Straussians, followers of Leo Strauss.
He was a first order apostle of Strauss, is one way to think.
Right. And he was, and here's what was interesting. So I was a student of Alan Bloom's, who was another first order apostle of Leo Strauss. And they were, though they had collaborated on a book about Shakespeare's politics, interestingly enough, like it was really Bloom's book, but there's an essay by Jaffa in it where Jaffa wrote about Julius Caesar, and Bloom wrote about other political plays of Shakespeare's. But then they were sort of at loggerheads or kind of at daggers drawn later on. And here's why, and why what's happened to the Claremont Review of Books is so interesting. So the question about the Straussians, who were the some orthodox followers of Strauss, was how committed were they to the American experiment? Strauss was essentially a philosophical conservative, refugee of the United States, from a Talmudic rabbinical family. He applied Talmudic approaches to studying things to political philosophy, and so was an extraordinarily close reader of political philosophy. And the question that always gripped the Straussians was: is philosophy are the great minds in the world in conversation with each other over the centuries, and what matter in the world and in life, what great people think, or is what matters actually sort of a world in which you try to make sure that people are free and stuff like that? Is freedom essentially the freedom to make sure that philosophers aren't killed the way Socrates was sentenced to death? Or is freedom about making sure that, the guy on the corner is as free as the king or the president of the United States? And the original Straussians were very oblique and uncomfortable about democratic republicanism, because they were worried, as conservatives always were in the 19th and 20th centuries, that it was leveling, that it was corrupting, that it was going to lower the culture, and it was actually going to come after the philosophers or something like that. And Jaffa, to his credit, though he was a total crazy person, I mean, he did write a genuinely great book about Lincoln and the Civil War, but he was a crazy person, as evidenced by the fact that if you ever mentioned him, it was like Voldemort. If you mentioned him in something, you would immediately get a 56-page single-space typed letter arguing with whatever proposition you had laid out that mentioned his name.
Just for color, that's what William F. Buckley was getting at when he famously said, if you think it's hard disagreeing with Harry Jaffa, try agreeing with him.
Yeah. I mean, he was a nut, but he was a He was very brilliant. He was a nut, and he was a lover of America. His idea was America was the greatest creation of man, and that the America that sprang from the Declaration of Independence was the greatest creation of man, and that our purpose in life was to defend it and protect this experiment, which was under intellectual threat from Marxists and from this and from the Straussians that he disagreed with in some ways, because they were not defenders of America on the grounds that it had created this, sort of uncommonly remarkable society, but because, they could have tenure and do whatever they wanted and make and be philosophers or something. Okay. So a student of Bloom's, was much more attracted to the philosophical tendency of the Jaffaites than I was to the Straussians, with whom I had problems because I thought they were insufficiently patriotic's not the right word, but insufficiently philosophically pro the American experiment.
Not as impressed with the American experiment as you thought they should be. Yeah.
And then in 2016, everything went haywire. And it was the Claremont Review of Books, or the Claremont Review of Books website, that published Michael Anton's Flight 93 election essay, which basically said, America is finished, the experiment has failed, we stink, and, we may have to crash the plane into the field in Pennsylvania or not, but we might as well give that a shot and put Trump behind the wheel, because
America will be over if Hillary Clinton wins because she's the hijacker.
Right. Now, this seemed to me to be an unbelievable violation of everything that the Jaffaites and the Claremont Review had stood for, which is America's not going to be thrown into chaos if Hillary Clinton wins the presidency. The system is extraordinarily strong. The system holds. Bad presidents are followed by good presidents, or what matters is that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and our history all give us reason to defend the experiment and praise it and make sure that our children, our grandchildren's children all know what gift they have been given. And here is Michael Anton and the Claremont Review coming and crapping all over it and acting as though it is not, it has failed, or it's failing, or it's dying, or something like that. And to my amazement, this has become J.D. Vance and his world is the world of the second iteration of the Claremont Review of Books. So I would be really happy to revisit that email that I sent to you and say, yes, we should center everything in the Constitution, because the center would mean that, we wouldn't have intellectuals defending from, Roger Kimball at the New Criterion to, whoever, defending the idea that Trump can trample on the separation of powers and, futz around with emoluments and I don't know what else, because the other side is evil, and therefore whatever Trump does in response to the other side is good. Right now, that would be a thrill to me if the right could somehow cohere around simply the idea that what we need to do is respect and defend the Constitution and the Declaration, particularly as we head into the 250th anniversary of the country. But back then, when I wrote you that email, I was like, if you make a fetish of the Constitution and the Declaration, and particularly the Declaration of Independence was Jaffa's idea was the Declaration was more important than the Constitution.
Right. The Declaration was the mission statement, the Constitution was the user manual kind of
thing. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, but I do think that they're all connected. In that way, I do think that there's a problem with saying, and we can see it now. So, if you act like America is over, then you're also like gonna not care about the traditions from which America sprang, or you're going to start making up demented lies, or not lies, but like philosophical crap about how America really came about. Like this is Yoram Hazony's intellectual corruption and perversion. No. John Locke was evil.
Right.
John Locke, who is, one of the sources of our contemporary understanding of liberty, Locke was bad. The Enlightenment was bad. All of this was bad. There's some guy named, Phil Schmendrick from the 15th century who wrote a 3-page pamphlet, and that's the real source of America's greatness that you never heard of and that nobody ever heard of. I found it, in the back, in the back of my bookcase, and this is it. And therefore we can ditch Locke and Hume and the Scottish Enlightenment and all of that and say that there was some other guy who did it, so that I can then say everything that you claimed about where America comes from is wrong, so that I can assert that anything that Trump does is okay by me. And, that is, speaking as a Jew, the weird part of, Judaism is an anti-idolatrous religion, and the crisis on the right. And I'm a great admirer of Trump's in many ways this year, and
Sure.
what he did in the Middle East and all of that. But, there is idolatry going on with Trump, and idolatry is the greatest of all sins, according to my faith. And the Claremont Review is like the, idol, is manufacturing idols. And it's weird that that's where it has come to. Like that was the last place you would have imagined would have gone down this road when Trump emerged, that its own intellectual fundament should have made it allergic to I alone can fix thinking. But it turned out it didn't, and maybe that's because it was too thinly based in the Constitution and the Declaration, and didn't take enough account of all the other things that ultimately this is about defending Western civilization and not just the United States.
Yeah. So, some quick notes on this. I think the Claremont Review of Books, and I understand this is in the weeds, but this is the world we live in, has self-corrected a bit. That Charles Kessler has pushed back on some of this stuff that I think he indulged too much.
The editor, or
he's the editor.
Is he still the editor, or is he like the editor emeritus? No,
I'm not.
He doesn't run the website.
Right. No, that's something else. Yeah.
The website, The American Mind, which I think is actually where the Flight 93 essay was published.
I think Flight 93. I mean, like, I could do an hour on my problems with the Flight 93 essay. Particularly talking about how people need to muster the courage to storm the cockpit, even if it costs their lives. But I'm not going to actually use my own name on my byline.
Yeah.
My point is that it's the Claremont Institute, I think, which is, the publisher of the Claremont Review of Books, that really lost its mind.
Right.
I think in miniature, what encapsulates this very well was that Paul Ingrassia guy, the guy with the Nazi texts, anti-Semitic texts, and all the rest, January 6th freak, two-time Claremont fellow.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the guy who's a lawyer who literally had tweeted once, Donald Trump is the Constitution.
Right.
That is idolatry.
Yeah.
Right. If you say some secular leader is the Bible or the Torah or, the 10 Commandments or whatever, that is idolatry. And, but my point is, I think I'll defend your email despite its haughtiness. I think you're right as a philosophical matter. Conservatism, broadly understood, has to be about muddling through, about, sort of in different moments, there are different threats to the West, and they're going to call on different responses, and not all those responses are going to come from the Constitution. But as a political enterprise in this moment, like, the Constitution is the constitutional theory, and I think Kessler is largely right when he wrote at one point, the nation, in talking about America, he says the nation didn't create the Constitution created the nation. Gordon Wood recently at the AI dinner talks about this, and Alan Gelzo writes about this, is, time of the founding, this really was literally a confederation. It was a plural, a plural polity of different sovereign nation states, the 13 colonies getting together what made it a nation state, really, what made it one thing, was the Constitution. And but for that, we would be the phrase. This is the Wood's point. He says, but for that, the United States would be a plural noun, not a singular noun. And I think that's right. And concentrating on the Constitution really, really matters. But I guess part of the reason I think about it is, I'm thinking about writing this book about conservatism, and I've become much more Burkean in recent years, insofar as, the essence of Burkean thought is it feels very Jewish to me, which is that, because I hear it through my dad in a lot of ways, which is that every good principle hits the point where, about every good principle, the Burkean would say, yes, but to a point. Right. And so we're all free marketers, but to a point, right? Like, we're for restrictions on porn and drugs and whatever. And you can have arguments about where the different points are. And I think you're right that the codifying of everything to say that conservatism is these things and not these things is one of the things that gets people into a mess. And the irony of it, and we can get off all of this, but like the irony of it is, one of the things that's caused this sort of a bit of an epiphany in me is how so many of the things Trump does, they are theatrically or performatively trolling, discomfiting, disturbing, all that kind of stuff. But the actual underlying impulse is actually pretty normie centrist. But he can never do a normie centrist thing in a normie centrist way. Mm-hmm. And so like the Mondami meeting in the Oval Office, politicians normally are pretty polite to the newly elected guy who won by a big margin, who comes to his office, and he does this, and everyone freaks out about it because it's so contrary to calling him a communist and an anti-Semite and all this kind of stuff. And you can go through a lot of things that Trump wants to do. That, I wrote about this thing recently. He's more Nixon than he is anybody else. Right. And Nixon didn't care about ideological stuff very much. He was an anti-communist, but beyond that, he had no problem with big government. He had no problem with any of these kinds of things. And watching people redefine what conservatism is to fit Nixonian pragmatism really illuminates the degree to which that if you're just going for the codifying thing, not the temperament thing, you're going to get pulled in whatever direction politics pulls you.
Right. Well, look, I have, for the last 10 or 12 years, been more inclined to refer to American conservatism as a tendency than as a ideological camp, because I think it really does speak to question in the sort of the souls of people who are genuinely conservative, which is like, you can get bored and you can think that things need to change, but hold your horses. Change is a very complicated thing, and change can lead to horrible unanticipated consequences. Things have developed in certain ways for a reason over a long period of time, as you would quote the famous Animal House Otter's statement about being just
long tradition of existence in the community.
and you want to be careful and prudent about how much change you want to seek, because you could make things much worse, even if your intention is to make them much better. Ultimately, to me, that is what conservatism in the American context is. It's like rueful understanding that change is problematic. Change may be necessary, but it's problematic, and you want to contain it and control it and not go all whole hog with everything and all of that. And I think part of what indicates that Trump is not a conservative, it's not just like he likes tariffs, because of course conservatives could like tariffs, like wrong, I think, on the merits, but and he could like national health care. There's an argument you could say, as he's now seems to be moving in some weird direction, you could almost see him pitching single payer by the end of his administration. What part of his philosophical construct would oppose that necessarily. Like, you know, I'm not sure you would have it. But you need to be in a place where you say, part of my purpose here is to slam on the brakes, you know, or to not even slam on the brakes, but ease your foot on the brake or something like
brakes,
that.
yeah.
Tap the brakes. Okay.
Yeah.
So the weird part about Trump world is how utterly uninterested it is in tapping on they want to step on the gas.
Mm-hmm. And
that is very much a violation of everything that we know about American conservatism, which is not Burkean Tory British conservatism, which has an entirely different thing. But America is a nation that is addicted to progress and addicted to the future and addicted to thinking that you can make the future better than the present and all of that. And there's no escaping that. But managing that impulse, like making sure your children don't run into the street, is part of what we do. And that's the weirdest part of, you mentioned Ingrassia. Well, so John Eastman, who was, I think, on the Claremont Institute board, is the lawyer who made the demented argument that the vice president had the power by himself on January 6th to overturn the legitimate results of the election. And that's why I say it's so weird that this is what Claremont, the source of this, devolved into, because that's a violation of every single precept that says the Declaration was the statement of principles and the Constitution was the user manual. You don't, if you have a user manual, you can revise it. We have an amendment process, but you can't simply throw the user manual out, because otherwise the machine, your washing machine will break. If you say, no, it's okay, I'll put sand in the gears of my car, it's like, well, then your car will break down. So you can't do that. That's why you have the user manual. Anyway.
That's why one of my favorite things John McCormick has ever done, dispatch reporter. McCormick asked Eastman once, okay, this is back when this was a live theory of his, right? And he says, okay, so if Biden wins and Kamala Harris is vice president, can she keep Biden in another term, regardless of even if Trump won? He's like, oh, no, that makes no sense. It's like, okay, you've made it very clear what you're really doing here. And just to put a bow on it, this is why I agree with you about the neoconservatives, is that most of the original neocons came into conservatism because they were disillusioned by the gas pedal. The gas pedal, just all gas pedal doesn't work. Here's a case of why we need to tap the brakes about crime. And here's we have to turn the car around back to these old ideas kind of thing, right? All right. Speaking of old ideas, we have talked many times on GLoP about the sort of, I wouldn't say we call it the Ross Douthat thesis, but the Hollywood is out of new ideas, so it just remakes movies all the time, right? And it even remakes movies of old TV shows. Brady Bunch movies, The Equalizer. I mean, we go down a very, very long list. 21 Jump Street. Is there a reason why? I mean, there have been a handful of remakes of sitcoms as sitcoms, but it feels like there have been more remakes of TV shows as movies than there have been remakes of TV shows as TV shows. I mean, you could take the Goldbergs, which was a radio show, which then became a sitcom about 15 years ago. But like, why aren't they like coming up with a new version of, I don't know, Cheers? Like that would, the intellectual argument for it be fine because the set could be the same. And like, it was about a place. So here are the new characters in this place, but we don't see that. Why?
So, all culture from the Greeks onward
recycles,
is based on previous IP, as they say, intellectual property. Homer is retelling stories that he heard
Right.
about the Trojan War. The Torah, the Jewish Bible, features stories that were taken from other Near Eastern tribes that are woven into, Job being the most prominent. The book of Job is a story about a non-Jew that comes from another another tradition in the Middle East that was adapted into the Bible. So even though the Bible is the word of God, if you believe that, nonetheless, somebody said, it would be a really good example of something we need to talk about is this story from, over there in Mesopotamia about this guy Job. Let's tell that story. So Shakespeare took the Hollingshead Chronicles. Everybody takes some, there's nothing new under the sun. And so when Hollywood came into existence in 1913, 1914, everything that Hollywood produced was based on previous IP. The most successful movie ever made, which was Birth of a Nation, was based on a novel called The Klansman. Ben-Hur was based on a novel called Ben-Hur. They did Shakespeare. They did this. They did that. Their IP was novels and plays of the previous, 300
Gone with the
years.
Wind. Right. Yeah.
Right. But everything. Okay. So then TV comes in, and TV actually has a new kind of form, which is that it's not, stories don't begin and end. Right? A television series, if it's successful, doesn't end. It just keeps going on. Right? All stories generally come to a point, and the Dick Van Dyke Show didn't come to a point. I Love Lucy didn't come to a point. Sometimes they would come up with a concluding episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show or Cheers or something like that because they knew they were coming to an end and they wanted to have a big emotional climax. But mostly TV shows are an effort to make something that can sort of go on forever. So as a result, they're the perfect thing to constantly remake or reboot, because it's not like you go, well, I can't touch that because it's really completed. I finished it, and there's no going forward. Then you have the problem in Hollywood of how do you get anybody to go out of their house anymore when there's too much fun stuff to do in their house. And so you need some kind of leg up. So the leg up is something that they know, that they have a fond feeling about, a title, a TV, something that they remember. And you can say, we got a brand spanking new version of it, all polished up and glittery, and it's going to be fantastic. Come out and see. So, and that doesn't really work anymore either. The big story this month, one of the big stories this month is they took the 1987 movie, The Running Man, itself based on IP, which was a Stephen King novel. Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's a terrible movie, right? It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Richard Dawson is a game show host, and the idea is that this guy has to try to survive while people are out hunting him and trying to kill him. And now there's a new version, and it cost $100 million, and Glenn Powell is a guy, and everybody in America is allowed to try to kill him, and if he can survive 30 days, it gets $1 billion. And they spent $100 million on this, and it's as they say, a 40-year-old piece of IP, a movie that very few people remember or think of fondly. I don't even think it was in heavy rotation on Turner, on TNT or anything like that. And nobody went to see it because it's what the hell is this? And it's not making me feel anything fond, and I can just stay home and watch The Beast Inside Me on Netflix, which apparently is the hottest show in the last 5 years, which is a Claire Danes 8-episode series. So, which I think itself is based on a novel. Anyway, so what's going on here is that Hollywood is dying, and it's trying to figure out, and the people who have to figure out how to cure it are second-rate businessmen who they're neither artists nor are they particularly good at understanding the American people. They're not this, they're just people who rise up in the studio system and end up taking over, and they're the ones who decide what to make and what not to make. and they're, monkeys throwing darts at a board would have just as much success at picking out what might be a huge hit as these guys have. And that's where we are.
Okay, that's a great summary of where we are. But I did ask a kind of more specific question, which was
asked, why don't they just remake Cheers?
Well, why haven't they?
And it doesn't work.
Yeah, but so they redid. They basically did a Black Odd Couple,
right,
like 25 years ago. Not great.
No, they redid The Odd Couple, by the way, 10 years. You don't even know this. Matthew Perry did a new version of The Odd Couple on CBS.
Yeah.
With an actor named Thomas Lennon, and it wasn't good. But I mean, I'm just saying, like, they make sitcoms, and then nobody watches it. Interestingly enough, the streamers make sitcoms, and nobody watches them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I have a theory, and Rob has a theory. My theory is that the threat of making a sitcom that offends people, the danger of making a sitcom that offends people, that will get you in trouble if you are the person who programs it or makes it, because it is politically incorrect in some fashion or other, because it offends present-day sensibilities in some fashion or other, is so great that if you make it, it either has to be incredibly anodyne, which means that no one will be interested in it, or, it has to be totally woke, which means that it's humorless and unfun. And so when they make Chuck Lorre, who made, like 2.5 Men and The Big Bang Theory, the two most successful sitcoms of the 21st century, tried to make a sitcom with Kathy Bates about a store that, like a cannabis store, which is called something like Disoriented or something like that. And it ran for 2 seasons on Netflix, and it was terrible because the idea was transgressive, right? Let's show a woman running a cannabis store somewhere. But of course, they didn't want to make fun of people who smoke pot, and they didn't want to make fun of people who were opposed to pot, and they didn't want to make fun of stoners, or they wanted to make fun of stoners, but that's all they had. And if you can't have, what are the classic sitcom characters? There's a dumb person. There's a sex pot. There's a randy guy who likes to chase skirts. There's a, and they put them all in a blender, and then they all get into conflict with each other. But if you make a show about a dumb guy, is someone going to say, well, that person is obviously on the spectrum. You're being very offensive because that person is obviously on the spectrum. And if you have a sex pot, it's like, well, you're exploiting. Look at her. She's in a low cut dress. This is, if she's like, Lonnie Anderson on WKRP in Cincinnati, that's terrible. That's just like, that's demeaning, and you're degrading women. And if you have a randy guy, then it's like, oh, you're saying it's okay to have someone who is like a horn dog with women, when obviously that person should be, should lose their job or something like that. There's so many minds in the minefield, in the cultural minefield, that everybody is just terrified of coming up with something that could just be funny because it deals with contemporary, mores and contemporary problems. I had this idea for remaking All in the Family like 10 years ago. Rob and I toyed around with this idea a little. And this was my idea, which was, you have essentially an Archie Bunker character, and Colin Quinn plays him. And he lives in Brooklyn, and he's an old timer from Brooklyn, meaning he lives in Brooklyn, is now hipster Brooklyn, but he's been living there for 50 years in the family house.
Last bastion against gentrifying. Yeah.
He probably a Vietnam vet, or at least an Iraq War vet. And he's a Trump voter. And his meathead is, a Mamdani voter, something like that, but is living in their basement because they can't afford anything else in New York. But Colin Quinn, the Trump voter, is also like, he smokes pot. He's, he's like, he likes hip hop. Yeah. He's not just like a classic Archie, but like everything is terrible and all you young people are stupid. It's not that. It would be the conflict between the woke people who want to say you're not allowed to say that, listen to that, look at that, or do something like that, who are the new Puritans, and then Archie Bunker, who is the Trump voter, but is actually more of a libertarian than his censorious, young Stalinist son-in-law. But we never got it off the ground. And you could see if we went somehow to Netflix to pitch this, it would go nowhere.
Yeah.
Because it would be like, well, I can't make a show where the Trump voter is the hero. Or, like, well, who's this fool? Who's going to watch? Why? What's the magic? What's the juice? What's the this? Like that. So I don't know. I just think basically, I've been saying this to my friend Kyle Smith and a couple of other people, like, you look at the movies, forget television, stuff like that. So the movies are over. Cinema is over. Cinema had a 110, 115 year run as the dominant art form, period. And, that's what happens. Like, epic poetry was the dominant art form from the mid 17th century to the mid 18th century, and then the novel came in, and the novel was the dominant art form for about 125 years until the cinema came in, and then the cinema came in and was the dominant art form. And now I don't even know if there will be a dominant art form, because everything is so atomized, and television is cinema, so it's not really, but some TikToks, things that go up, like are shaped for the phone being, vertical instead of horizontal. Things are 2 minutes long. I have no idea what video games, AI movies that don't have anybody in them and no one writes. Who knows 25 years from now where we'll be. But I think basically what this year proves, as somebody who's been writing about movies for like, I don't know, close to half a century, is things open and nobody pays attention. Or if they pay attention, they pay attention for a week. Nothing bursts through. There's nothing, except for Barbie and Oppenheimer in the last 5 years, nothing has burst through to have people talk about. And this year, there have been highly controversial movies like One Battle After Another, Eddington. Have you seen those? Probably not. Most people haven't. Most people won't care. And you go back to like 1969, and there's a movie called Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, which is about two California couples that decide that they're going to do wife swapping, or they're going to, and so it's like salacious and dirty and all of that, but that's not really what it was. It was really about two difficult marriages. That movie made the equivalent of $800 million. And the big scene in it is a 10-minute argument between Elliot Gould and Diane Cannon about why it is that they need, when one of them wants to have sex, the other doesn't want to have sex, and what is wrong with them, and what's wrong, what the hell is going on. 10 minutes, a 10-minute dialogue scene, and people needed to see it so they could talk about it at work. Well, now nobody goes to work, so no one's at the coffee, on the coffee break talking about what was on TV last night or what was at the movie theater. So you don't have to talk about it. If you made Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice now, it would be on Netflix and nobody would watch it. And that's where we are. So, and once, 50 years ago, it made $800 million. By the way, I want to defend Trump for a second. A lot of people in Hollywood are screaming and yelling about how Trump wants the Ellison family to take over Paramount, and it's on their side, and this is terrible. He's interfering with the free market as Paramount is being sold or whatever, or Warner Brothers Discovery, is being sold. And Trump says, you know what, today, he says, if you get it, you should remake Rush Hour with Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan. I love that movie. Why don't you remake that? And a whole bunch of people in Hollywood in the last couple of days that said, you see, Trump is already working his will on the Ellison family, demanding that they remake Rush Hour and that he'll look with favor on this merger. They just remake Rush Hour. So I look up Rush Hour, and Rush Hour, which came out in 1994.
It's a huge hit, right?
Made, again, in present day dollars, $1.6 billion. Yeah. It made $900 million worldwide, which is $1.6 billion now. And its sequels, It had 2 sequels, which were less and less successful. But Rush Hour 3, which is unwatchable, made the equivalent of $800 million.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you remake Rush Hour? If you're going to remake The Running Man,
Yeah.
like
Although,
Running Man made a 20th of the money that Rush Hour made. And so, I don't know. So the psychotic world of Trump derangement syndrome also has this weird effect of like, Trump says, I loved Rush Hour. Go remake Rush Hour. That's part of that's something you could do. And it's like, you know what? That's not a bad idea. Nixon once sent a play in to whoever was the coach of the Washington Redskins. Nixon designed a play that he wanted them to do that ended up in a 4-yard loss. So I don't know. Presidents can suggest things to people in other industries without it being, an act of blackmail.
Yeah. So look, I agree with you. I mean, I missed this entire controversy, but it sounds like I agree with you. I didn't like Rush Hour, but like I will say that one of the reasons why Rush Hour made a lot of money, I'm open to correction on this, is that this was in the golden age of figuring out hooks that would make the movie do well in China.
Right.
And having Jackie Chan in a movie guarantees global box office success.
Right.
And a lot of those movies that went over the heads of the American audience for global box office, I think were worse because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it, like, I remember I think it might be the first or second piece I wrote for National Review was about the Matthew Broderick Godzilla movie, which was so obviously written for a global audience rather than an American audience, with some, nods to the American audience. And, so the badass heroes are French. The Americans are sort of clumsy and stupid. They were kind of compensating for Independence Day, which a lot of people in foreign markets took offense at and all that kind of stuff. And it's weird to me. It's like the problem with the globalization stuff, the globalized movie market stuff, was it concentrated almost entirely on violence and sex, because that's one of the few things that crosses all borders that people will pay attention to. And now you get these niche micro-targeted things because no one's planning on selling, to 100 million people worldwide or whatever. All right, but
by the way, I'm glad you mentioned Godzilla, because I want to show you what it's like to be me, just for 2 seconds.
Okay.
For some reason, something came up like a week ago that showed me a picture of the 1998 Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, boy, that was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that was a bad movie. Whereas, like the new Godzilla, there were 2 new Godzillas. There was a Godzilla with Bryan Cranston like 10 years ago. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
And then there's this amazing Japanese reboot of Godzilla that came out 2 years ago, which is called Godzilla Year Zero or something like that.
Day One or something like that. Yeah.
Just fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of these. I don't like these kaiju monster movies.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, boy, that was terrible. And wait a minute, who was the co-star? Who was the female co-star? So, who was cute? I remember being cute and like, who was she and what happened? So I looked her up, and her name is Maria Pitillo, and she was she was like a soap opera actress, and she was in a couple of things, and she was just slaughtered when this movie came out. Like, clearly this was her big break. She was the star of this huge movie that was supposed to be the big movie of the year. And like, she won the Razzie Award for the worst actress of the year. Mm. And the reviews were horrible. And I'm like, whatever happened to her? And then because of the nature of the internet, I was able, with 3 or 4 clicks and some, little bit of spade work, to discover that she is a real estate agent in Oregon. So that is what happened to Maria Pitillo, is that she is selling, real estate in Oregon. And if she's listening, I always thought you were very cute, and I hope your life is better than the horrible life that people do live in Hollywood. Maybe you got off lucky by having this. You had your moment in the shade, and then you got to be an ordinary person.
So listeners should know that Pod and I spend a good amount of time texting each other about things like this that we have discovered. Yeah. So I'm a little offended you didn't tell me about this last week.
I'm sorry,
but I believe it's the little boy who was in Seinfeld I'm sorry, the little boy who was in When Harry Met Sally, named Jonah,
Yeah.
right? I went on a deep dive. He was also the little boy whose dad was the publisher from Pendant Publishing, who says
On
to his
Seinfeld?
dad, I read, I am no longer a Jew," because
Yeah.
he couldn't date Elaine or something like that.
Yeah.
And then where is he now? I think he ran a car dealership in Santa Barbara. I could have that wrong, but it was something like that. And then
Look, when you read about a child actor and they're not dead,
yeah,
you're
exactly.
like, that's great.
Yeah.
You made it.
Yeah, well,
As
and
long as you're not
the kid
dead.
the original kid from Willy Wonka just gave up everything and
The
went to Canada
veterinarian or something.
Yeah, and he was like he was like,
Yeah.
"This is not for me." And it's like,
Yeah.
you let out this giant sigh of relief to find out they're not eating out of a dumpster,
or died of an overdose, or or in an insane asylum or something. Like, it is not good. Not good to be a child actor. Like, your future is not assured. Let me just say.
Yeah, my daughter got very, very angry at us when we not just discouraged but refused to participate in her wanting to be driven to New York for auditions when she was a little girl, and we're much more worried about you succeeding than you failing at this.
Yeah.
But all right, last question. I can't remember, did we talk about it on GLoP? Maybe I'd only seen 2 episodes of Death by Lightning.
See, this Death by Lightning thing is an amazing thing. I think this is kind of how things go viral, even though it's of course a multi-million-dollar. It's not really viral because they probably spent $40 million. But this igniting of people suddenly of interest in James Garfield alone,
right,
who it turns out was a absolutely remarkable American,
right,
and the horror of assassinations is really demonstrated by how he was cut down so early when he showed such amazing promise as a leader, cut down by a psychotic assassin. But I love this show. I think it's really a model for something to follow. The same actress who was in the, what was it called, American Primeval, Betty Gilpin.
Mm-hmm.
American Primeval is about the
I love that series,
the massacre, a true life story about the Mormon Meadows massacre in 1857. So she's now become the 19th century American woman on shows. But these shows that sort of delve into real life stories in American history, and as long as they don't get anachronistic and turn them into woke dramas and stuff like that, it's a really great thing. And it turns out that the Competitive Enterprise Institute, of all things, which is a Washington think tank dedicated to deregulation largely, out of nowhere made a 45-minute documentary that is adjacent to Death by Lightning, because it's called Dear Mr. President. I recommend it on the Commentary Podcast. You can watch it on YouTube. And so when Garfield died, his vice president, Chester Alan Arthur, became president, and Arthur was the most corrupt person in America. He had been the customs official in New York, stole millions of dollars. Most of the revenue for the government came through the Port of New York. He was part of the stalwarts who basically believed the spoil system, stole money, and they thought it was fine. And he ended up, as is explained in the show, brilliantly ended up as the vice president, staggered that this had even happened. And then Garfield dies, and Garfield was a reformer, and he was an anti-reformer. That was how they ran the ticket. And Arthur then ended up, to everybody's amazement, understanding that Garfield had been assassinated in part because of the spoils system, and then championed and signed into law the first civil service law in the United States, the Pendleton Civil Service Act, that killed the spoils system off at the federal level. Anyway, this documentary, which everybody should watch, is about this woman, Julia Sand, 31-year-old woman in New York, who started writing Chester Arthur letters saying, be good, be a good president. Don't be a coward. You know what's right. Do what's right. He didn't know her, knew nothing about her. They came like essentially, over the transom.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote him 21 letters, and these letters had an enormous impact on Arthur and the decisions that he made over the next 3 years. It's one of these weird, great American stories that I've never heard of, because nobody ever talks about Chester Alan Arthur or Garfield or anything like that. And her sort of moral, she was like Jiminy Cricket on his shoulder, like telling her what the right thing to do was, telling him what the right thing to do was. And this is really a terrific, it's like 40 minutes long, this documentary about Julia Sand. And they also have a website where you can read the letters that she wrote to Arthur. And so Death by Lightning not only illuminates this, also brought me to read the book that Death by Lightning is based on, which is called Destiny of the Republic by Candace Millard, which is fantastic. Short, punchy, sort of like an Eric Larson popular history. And then this documentary, Dear Mr. President.
So the question I was going to ask, because I had Sarah Isger, actually this will, I think, air before the one I did with her, so this will be a little more polished. She's been a huge fan of that book for a long time and has been bugging me to read it. And well, first of all, she says that she and Chuck Todd have a theory that this show was originally supposed to be 8 episodes, because it really is rushed towards the end. And someone at Netflix was like, there just aren't enough nerds out there to want to watch 8 episodes of this, so let's make it 4. And so the good news is, I think the interest in this is sending a good market signal out there that you can do this kind of thing if done well, and people will watch. And so with that in mind, it doesn't have to be an American history.
Yeah.
History of the last 250 years. What is something that you would love to see a Death by Lightning kind of, call it 8-part Netflix series, or more ambitious, that 10 years ago, someone was like, you can't make a movie or you can't make a miniseries out of that. What is some obscure thing that most people don't know about that you would want to make into something like that? It can be.
That's really interesting.
I'll give you one while I'll give you a second because I'm ambushing you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, my wife's been doing all this work on this book about her dad, and she did a huge deep dive on her family's history, basically a whole Slovakian Alex Haley thing, right? And went to Slovakia a couple times and got her grandmother's diary and did the family tree stuff, whatever. And so we've been kind of, by osmosis, I've been kind of obsessed with it too. The story of the Czechoslovak or Czech legions, depending on what you want to call them, were basically the Czech army in World War I gets stuck behind enemy lines in Russia and has to basically fight a war from trains across the entirety of the now Soviet Union, and so they can get back to Czechoslovakia to fight for Czech independence, because that's where things are now, because Russia pulls out of the war. And it's this amazing story with, this grand sweep that goes, they end up having to go to, what is it? I don't know, Vladivostok or whatever that is up in the, crazy northwest near Japan, and take the Pacific all the way around to Western Europe, to then go through Western Europe to get back to Czechoslovakia to fight for democracy and freedom and independence in their own country. And it's it was a huge deal, part of the Russian Civil War, because they have to fight their way out of it and all of this. And no one knows about it. I think it would be a fantastic action movie or series or something like that. So that's one I would throw.
That's an amazing. Okay, so I've 2.
Okay.
I can think of. One is the Lindbergh baby kidnapping story, which has been made, Anthony Hopkins, before he became a huge star, played Bruno Hauptmann, the chauffeur who was eventually hanged for supposedly being the kidnapper. But it's still apparently it's a very vague question about whether or not he was actually the guy who did it, and the investigation was very tarnished. And, in a world of true crime, the most famous person in the world having their kid kidnapped and killed, or one of the most famous people who ever lived. That's a pretty amazing story, and apparently there are a lot of twists and turns in it. The other would be, to get more literary, but also you could do all kinds of stuff, is the bizarre, amazing story of the writing of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Oh, that's good.
Frankenstein.
With Byron and all that crazy stuff?
She was 18 years old, and there was a weekend where she and her husband and Byron and all this were together on a, I don't know, visit to Switzerland or something.
Hiking trip in Switzerland.
Yeah, and then they sat and they basically set a challenge, which was somebody's got to write something. Anyway, the story is that what emerged from this, there were these two great poets, Shelley and Byron, and then the 18-year-old cute wife of Shelley, who was the daughter of a very, very important figure in English history, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was like essentially the founder of all feminism.
Mm-hmm.
But she was, she had gone off with Shelley. He was much older and stuff. And that weekend, she produced a work that is arguably more enduring than anything that Shelley or Byron ever wrote.
Yeah.
And what happened? What was going on there? How did it happen? What were it's sort of like almost like Knives Out, but at the end, no one's dead, but this masterpiece written by an 18-year-old girl emerges.
Not to be crass, but to loop it back to a movie you talked about earlier, it's I think there was some fun with Bob and Ted and Alice or whatever action going on that weekend too.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you could, it's a classic sort of like house mystery. What the hell was going on in this house?
Yeah.
But again, Shelley wrote, Byron wrote Don Juan. He was the most famous poet of the 19th century, and Shelley wrote great poetry and all this. But it's likely that the work that certainly has been read more, and I just reread it after seeing the highly problematic Netflix movie, which is, the second half is great and the first half is terrible, of Frankenstein, made by Guillermo del Toro. And I hadn't read Frankenstein in years, and it really is it's like a kind of sprung full bore, like Athena from Zeus's head. It is a masterpiece, unbelievably imaginative and thoughtful, and nothing like it had ever been written before.
Well, all right, hold on. You're the one who began this by saying everything is about borrowing IP.
Yeah.
There's a case to be made that, I mean, again, I'm not trying to take away any of the creative genius of it.
Yeah.
But the story of the golem, Jewish story, plays a role in the story of Frankenstein.
Very much. But I mean, what she did was she assembled, people don't really know this, and Frankenstein begins not with the story of the creature and the creature's creation and Frankenstein himself, but with this sea captain who is out in the North Atlantic, stuck in the ice, and this man shows up on a sled saying, "Have you seen anyone out here?"
Yeah.
Sort of, she began it in this absolutely kind of astounding way that is part of one of the many surprises of the book, which I heartily commend to anybody who has not read it. It's short, it's pithy, it's an amazing piece of work. But I guess those are the two that I can.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. All right, my friend. I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving.
I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving, and I hope you have all the brisket, ham, turkey, stuffing, and I hope you don't, in the family football game, that you don't get injured. Is there going to be a family football game?
We will see. This is the biggest Thanksgiving gathering of Gavora I have heard of in quite a while. So, I don't think there'll be any ham. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some stray ham. You can't avoid it. Yeah. But my understanding is it's turkey and prime rib. So There you go.
Sounds good.
All right, my friend.
Okay.
We will obviously talk soon.